lodge when it did rain real hard, and every time I would share that, the legend of the rain, nobody ever complained or wanted their money back. Now, everyone has this legend. Actually, I started that rain legend when Katrina happened, and when I speak of how people just only had what they owned that they could carry in their arms. So each time I share legends, there's portions of that, and I think of just the people who lose everything but what they have in their arms. It's a very easy way of telling legends if you can put it in that predicament. And this is the same. I have best friends. I mean, I have best friends from grade school. I have teachers from junior high, from grade school that are my best friends. I have new friends, I have family friends. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't the support of my family and my friends. And I also want to dedicate this afternoon's program to a very, very, very kind and soft-hearted man from the Quinault tribe. His name was Norman Capoman, and my aunt, who died 102. She was the oldest driver in the state of Washington. She was 101 and still lived alone and drove. Wow. So I like to dedicate this story to those beautiful people. And this legend that I share is a true story. And it all began long, oh, so very long ago, that only people lived on the earth. There were no animals or there were no birds. If you can imagine, there were no elk or deer or beavers or rabbits, the songbirds, the robins, the eagles, the osprey, the ducks, or not even the crows. It was just people. Until the day that Raven, the trickster, got bored. He got bored of watching us people do the most boring things, and it all began with these two little girls. And because it is a true story, these weren't princesses. They weren't beautiful. Well, in fact, Itzwood, well, she was so, can I say, ugly, that if you glanced at her, you couldn't help but stare. She was so ugly. Now, since she was a little girl, unfortunately, her demeanor went with her looks. Everything that came out of her mouth was, oh, you're so stupid. You're so dumb. I make better baskets than you do. I don't even know why you even tried making baskets. And she always put everybody down. So she didn't have very many friends other than her other friend, Chitwin. Now Chitwin, she was beautiful, mind you, but she had a problem of putting down her dish. She would go for seconds and sometimes thirds. She always would boast real loudly that she was big boned and that's the way her size was. And she always boasted really long, which Itzwoods must have been hard of hearing, because whenever you saw one, you always saw the other. Now, mind you, they weren't, but in their hearts, from the time they woke up in the morning until the time they went to sleep, they were always giving. If somebody needed berries, they would pick berries for the family. If there was a family that needed fish, they would bring them fish. If there was a basket maker that needed materials, they were always there to give. So they had a beautiful heart. And it was no different for this one day that Itzwoods and Chitwin had been down on the beach digging for a big, juicy, gooey duck. Now, they had been working on this hole for quite some time when all of a sudden, in the distance, they heard the strangest Now, mind you, they learned from their parents that whenever they heard of something that scared them, they instantly climbed the closest tree for safety. And within a matter of minutes, they were up against the tree hanging on. And it was then that all of a sudden, out of the woods came these rows and rows of strange creatures. One went by sounding like this. Meh, meh. Behind that, meh, meh. Behind that, and it went on and on. Those animals ran straight by. They didn't come back until the upside down faces. You know, the settlers, they have more hair down here than up here. Well, when the upside down faces came back, they brought all those strange creatures back. But the girls hung on to the tree until finally the strange sounds still were coming from the longhouses. And it was then that the girls creepily came down the tree and they ventured to get closer to the longhouses. And as they came up over the edge of the hill and looked down, lo and behold, Raven had been coming down and touching the people and turning them into the people, to the animals they are today. They came down on one elderly woman who spoke of love and peace. He came down and touched her and turned her into Then he came down on one young man who had been busying himself by carving on a canoe. He came down and touched him and turned him into Then he came down on one little boy who'd been jumping from lap to lap, making giggles. He came down and touched him and turned him into Then he came down on the elderly chief who always had wisdom in his heart. He came down and touched that elder and turned him into Then he spotted the two girls. And within a matter of moment, Raven came down and touched one little girl and turned her into Heron. And in a blink of an eye, Heron came down on Chitwin and turned her into Bear. And then Raven flew off. Now, Chitwin and Itzwitz, all brand new to their body, Itzwitz, who was now a heron, was having a hard time staying on these stick-like feet, and she was having a heck of a time with her big beak. With that, her friend, who now is Bear, started circling her as she was trying to compose herself on her unbalanced legs. Itzwitz announced, you're not going to eat me, are you? And Chitwin goes, you want me to eat that? Those long stick-like feet, they'd get stuck in my throat. And I could be able to see every fish that goes down that long neck of yours. Well, Heron, now all upset, turns to Bear and says, well, I don't know about you, but what's that smell? And then you seem to have a pretty good side behind. Well, nothing changed. They still were best friends. So each morning they would go fishing together, getting clams together, doing the same thing. Well, it was this one particular day where Itzwitz, who is now Heron, was walking early in the morning over to visit Bear. And on the way, she noticed that she could see her breath in the air. And as soon as she got to Bear's longhouse, to her surprise, Bear was still asleep. Now this was a no-no upon no-nos. As soon as that sun comes, you must jump off your cattail mat as soon as possible. So she started shaking Bear. Wake up, wake up. No response. She took her long beak and started poking at Bear. And it was then that Bear arose and she turned to her friend and said, "Leave me alone." Those words went straight to Heron's heart. And Heron turned to her friend and said, "I never, ever want to see you again." Those words went straight to their hearts, and they never seen each other again. Now Bear married. Oh, she not only had one or twins, she had triplets. Heron had married and had given birth to a flock of herons. And they were down spending the day on this beautiful beach digging clams. Well, Mr. Heron noticed there was a little sadness on his wife. He came up and gently put his wing around her and asked, "Honey, is there something that is bothering you?" And Heron announced, "When I had a different body than I have today, I had a friend, and we used to come here every day and play and swim, but I have not seen my friend for a long, long time." Mr. Heron announced, "I will take care of our children, and I want you to travel and find your friends and make amends." So the very next morning, Heron, with a ration of small salmon, started to fly over the different ridges and the different oxbows of the rivers. She had been over half the day, and as she came over the one ridge and looked down, there in the river of the edge was a bear that had a twinkle in her eye. And before Heron could land next to Bear, Bear turned to her friend and said, "I'm so sorry. You see, when you can see your breath in the air, I go to sleep for many moons. I am so sorry that I spoke those words to you." With that, Heron turned to her friend and apologized, and once again they were friends. A big, big dinner, a celebration. They're friends once again. So Bear invited the Heron family over for dinner. When the Bear family arrived to the dinner, there were 5 different kinds of salmon, 5 different kinds of berries. And as they sat down to partake of a wonderful meal, Heron started giggling. And as her giggle started getting louder, Bear turned to her friend and said, "What is so funny?" And Heron announced, "You forgot the oolican oil." Now, oolican oil is, it makes the salmon taste so good. It's like a smelt, an oil from a smelt fish. And you dip it and it makes the salmon taste so good. And to forget such an important part of a meal was, Well, Bear ran down to the beach. She picked up a large shell and brought it and set it next to the fire. Then Bear took her large claws and placed them into the flames of the fire. When the claws got red hot, grease started to drip from the claws, filling the shell. And they came back and finished the meal. Now, as you all know, when you're invited to a meal, you in return must have a meal also. And so Heron, being a bit of a copycat, when the bear family arrived, she too had 5 salmon, 5 berries. They were sitting down to partake of a wonderful meal when the bear family all started in unison, the greatest little giggle. Oh, Heron goes, what seems to be the problem? And Bear whispered to her friend, you forgot the ooligan oil too. Heron, remembering what Bear had done, she too ran down to the beach, picked up a large shell, set it next to the fire. She, looking at her long stick legs, she decided she better put both her feet into the fire. And as she placed both of her little stick feet into the fire, all that happened was they had turned black and curled up and burned so bad that to this day, whenever you see herons, they're always standing in water. Nahash. Those are my two new legends. Are there any questions?
The talking stick, was that?
Yeah, the talking stick, well, similar to the peace pipe, but the talking sticks were very common in the coastal Salish longhouses because who's ever holding it is the only one that's allowed to talk, so that there wouldn't be any interruptions. And if you don't feel good that day, or if you're mad or angry, it's best to pass the stick past if you're in that state of mind. And then you just, that way that there wasn't any interruption. This is actually a vertebrae of a bear. My son made it when he was in high school, and now he's 34. And he had the 2 discerning metals to a crystal, which in reality it was a real talking stick because you could get a transition radio through it if it was worked correctly. But the driftwood spirits, I was sharing with a couple people earlier that there is more driftwood in the Olympic Peninsula and everywhere in the whole world. The biggest place of driftwood is here in the Olympic Peninsula. So that we use different shapes of roots for the talking sticks and the staffs and the walking sticks and such. I've got quite a few of them that I'm working on too. Oh, and with Norman Cocoman, he loved his dogs. And so the basket weavers are very common to weave something from that family. I'm going to share this for his family when the memorial comes across. The Skokomish, I'm part Purdy, Miller, Culty. My grandmother, when they were taking the names, we had to pick names from either the Bible or from recent presidents. That's how come you hear Johnny Moses, Washington's their last name. Well, my great-great-grandmother, she didn't want to pick any of the names, and so finally the Indian agent said, well, she is Purdy, so write her down as Purdy. And they finally spelled it P-U-R-D-Y. So that was kind of cute on that uncles. And my uncle was a ranger at the Hood's Canal, so I got to spend summers at Hood's Canal, and then he was also a ranger at Lake Quinault when I was little. So I have a real great presence into the woods here. So, are there any other questions?
I have a question. The Quinaults, I believe, I'm not an expert, but they had a sizable piece of land that they were given through treaty. And at one point, Highway 101 was built, and I can look at the map and it looks like there's a big detour there around the Quinault Reservation.
Nation, yes.
And what was the thinking, if you know, I mean, did the Quinaults object to the road?
From
going
my
through?
understanding, they objected it, they wanted to stay with, well, they were really misunderstood because the original treaty was above the lake, which included the whole lake and down to the,
Oh, yeah,
Tahoe,
which lake is that?
Lake Quinault.
Lake Quinault.
But when the treaty was signed, for some reason, it went from Amanda Park down. And I believe that there was, because of that, they said, okay, nobody can travel through our reservation, you have to go around.
Okay.
But the original reservation was all the way from Shelton to Tahoe, all the way down the I-5 corridor, all the way down to the Columbia River. was the vast amount that the Quinaults and the Chinooks. Because my great-great-grandfather was Chinook. And just like an amoeba, when a group of people get too many in a tribe, they literally just naturally divide. And so the Chinooks moved up to the Quinaults, to where the hole is right now. And some of the Chinooks moved up into the Portland area, you know, so there was a vast division, so.
Thank
Uh-huh.
Yeah, although I know Johnny Moses, my mentor was Toksha Blue by Hilbert. Did you be acquaintance with her too?
I only had a chance to just visit with her. Unfortunately, I never got a chance to hear any of her legends, but Vi was,
Vi was
she
a good
was,
friend of mine.
and Bruce Miller.
Bruce
Miller
is
was,
my cousin.
yeah, he was my cousin too.
We're cousins. We were talking about that on the way in.
You were nuts. Did you have a question?
I did, but it escaped.
Anybody else have any questions? And by the way, too, if you hear or know of any storytellers, there are a whole new generation of storytellers that are filtering up through, and I'm really, some of them, there's one in his 20s, and he's really going to be a fantastic storyteller. So be sure to acknowledge all the storytellers, how the bed is flat, and all the new ones. Mm-hmm.
Do they have to go through some kind of a process, or
For
can they
story?
can they just declare themselves storytellers, or?
For me, it was meant to be. It was in my blood. I had no idea I was going to be a storyteller. I was going to sit home and weave baskets and be shy. So it's in the person's blood. When I went and shared legends, Francis, Rosander, and Tiki, my uncle and my aunt, they came and they said, "Oh, you sound just like your uncle," and he passed away, you know, years and years ago, and I never heard him, but I sound just like him. So just like when you come into the teachers, and we can tell, you know, that I'm going to be a basket maker, you know, because when I started taking classes, all my teachers came up and whispered, "You got to be a basket maker." You know, I thought, "Oh yeah, right," you know, and sure enough, I was a basket maker, but I didn't know that. At the time, I was going to go on to be a midwife, so I ended up, I had children and made baskets. Are there any other questions? Uh-huh.
What was your nickname?
Oh, Baby Bullhead. And they still call me Baby Bullhead. I think that I am very, because when I was little, they always say, "You need to make baskets," because I wasn't patient at all. I wanted it done now, you know, so it works too. So, well, I'd like to thank the Sheltons for inviting me to come here and share with you some of the legends, and I hope sometime down the line we'll cross paths once again. Nahashka, thank you.